because credentials you can mean shit. Because there are a lot of people who have a lot of credentials and don't know dick about nothing. Mom, come here, look.
Welcome back to another episode of the Ellison Performance Podcast. We actually have a name for it now. Last week I had no idea what I wanted to call it. But today we have Ben Kuharik on. He'll go through his credentials and everything like that. Co-worker here at the Cleveland Clinic. Has a lot of experience and insight on a lot of topics. Today we'll just introduce him, let him talk about his thing. We'll go into some of his MMA background, how that differs from like traditional training. Some talk about more sport-specific questions, talking about range of motion, when you would want to use partial range of motion versus full range of motion, or which one's better. And at the end, we'll talk about our potential business starting soon for like 2 minutes, just to let everyone know what's going on. So take it away. What are your credentials? What's your experience? How long have you been doing what you've been doing?
All right, just in general, my credentials, I have a bachelor's of exercise science from Kent State, got my ACSM exercise physiologist certification. I got a job here at Cleveland Clinic Akron General in their wellness center. I'm their coordinator now of the fitness staff. And then I decided, I at first wanted to go into cardiac rehab, so I pursued a little bit more of that, but then I decided I didn't really care for that, so I thought maybe more physical therapy. I went back for my PTA. I have a couple plans for the future as physical therapy assistant. I have a couple plans for the future depending on where I can take my own like personal training programs and things like that. Whether I decide to pursue like the doctorates of PT or if I just stay PTA and do my own personal like exercise physiologist job.
Actually, I'm not that familiar with like his MMA background, but I've heard he has been doing, not recently, but for a long time, MMA training. He's been a fighter. Well, that'll be our first topic today because I know I'm not very familiar with the different training styles compared to like a Gen Pop for MMA training. So have you just go into depth about like what you would do to train for like, just like let's say a fight, how early on you would start training for that fight.
Okay, I got into MMA when I was like 14 or 15. To end of perspective, I was around 240 pounds, average as an obese person could be. When I got into MMA, I ended up losing 70 pounds over like 3 to 4 months. I did it completely unintentionally. Like what kind of helped is me and my first girlfriend that I ever had broken up after like almost a year.
Cry if you need to, but I can't stay to watch you. That's the wrong thing to do.
Started MMA, which is like I don't know. I trained very hard with MMA. From day one, I did it every day after day one. Like all days of the week as much as I possibly could. I lost like 70 pounds or whatever, totally changed my life. One day I looked in the mirror and I was like, wow, this shirt is really big on me. And I just didn't think anything of it. And then like for some reason, I had this like size medium shirt and I was probably wearing like a double X or whatever, but I never wore it. I just had this. So I walked over and I put it on and I looked in the mirror and I was like, Mom, come here, look. And I lifted religiously and I trained religiously, but I didn't spend time researching that much or whatever. And I got a serious back injury. I had like 3 like slipped discs, and over time they said there was some arthritis that was noticeable between like my L4 and L5 and vertebrae, things like that. And every doctor I ever went to was like, all right, you should stop doing MMA. 3 years and I'm not even old enough to fight, so that's a ridiculous thing to tell me. It was just not good. And I was like in serious chronic pain from like 16 to like 19 years old. I started researching a little bit on my own about injuries and things like that, even though I never planned on doing anything PT related. And I was able to finally like get my back to a point where I could train really hard again without like feeling completely debilitated after because I was in pain.
I'm glad you kind of recognize that. Everyone at my other job completely agrees that most doctors, I saw your one repost in your story, most doctors will literally be like, I don't want you ever doing a hinge or a deadlift again because your back injury.
Oh yeah.
But just learning your own body and learning just through researching through like literally like TikToks or Instagram, you can just try out stuff, and like just doing different movements and stuff will be enough medicine to like rehabilitate on your own. Like I've been listening to tons of podcasts this week where people literally have completely rehabilitated like a labrum injury by themselves. Like it's possible, and I feel like most of the time the doctors are phenomenal, but they just don't have enough time to go in depth with every case and be like, oh yeah, like you have potential to rehab on your own and stuff. They're just like, no, you're done. Like you're done. Just don't do this ever again. Which you need to do movements similar to what caused the injury in order to rehab it. You just need to know what you're doing. So I think it's a good.
Definitely, I ended up really like just training major stability of my low back, and I got it to a point where I could always train really hard, but like I still have serious problems today, and they would always get unbelievably bad when I would try to lose weight, usually for a fight. Especially my only MMA fight that I ended up having, because I ended up getting injured so many times before that, I only ended up getting one MMA fight. But I did like 8 kickboxing fights, things like that. But talking about the training for MMA fights, like specific lifts, I wouldn't do too much. I just did a lot of core. And I think that's actually important for anyone in like a contact sport or a sport where you're likely for high injury risk, is to put a serious focus on corrective exercises itself. Like with baseball, like working like the posterior chain and stuff of your shoulder, because you're constantly working anteriorly. Because I think in terms of especially contact sports, the people that like compete for a long time and become the best are the ones that stay injury free or recover from injury. It's not always like the best people in the world probably get injured, like half of them get injured before they can do anything, and then they have like a life problem that they're not able to get to the level that they would. So I think for MMA training specifically, or any contact sport, doing serious corrective exercises like working rotator cuff, like stability of the hip, low back, a lot of core stuff, like anterior tib, things that get neglected, like end up weaker. Just putting a focus on that should be a huge thing to program when you are in a contact sport.
The point I want to talk about, from like at 440, we talk about how full range of motion is always optimal unless you're doing like a quarter squat, like jump squat or something sport specific. Because in a sport, you are never going to be at half range of motion. Let's say you're juking someone out on a route. Football, you're never going to be at half range of motion. If you run a slant, catch it up the middle, and you have to dive for it and just get absolutely pummeled, you're going to be fully extended. You got to be able to take contact and go through different resistances at full range of motion, or you're going to get injured.
For sure. And like people, like you like, unlike with weights, like you control everything with weights essentially, like how far you're going to go, everything like that. So you need to be able to stay safe in a controlled setting to keep yourself safe in more of an uncontrolled setting.
Yeah.
So training in like as many ranges in terms of like keeping yourself safe with like sports that especially like MMA and stuff, jiu-jitsu, because your arms are tangled up like no other. You need to have strength in stretched positions, and you need to train for that.
I think that goes into like the law of diminishing returns. Like in MMA, strength will only get you so far. Like for basic, I don't know how the belts go, but I've only gone like one jiu-jitsu session, and when I was going against like some of the less experienced people, I don't know any moves, but they couldn't submit me because I was just plain out stronger than them. But there got to a point where I was going against guys that I was still stronger than, but the skill and their ability to get out of vulnerable positions just triumphed, and I couldn't do anything, no matter how strong I was. Their skill and their ability to like slip out of weird and awkward positions was better than being strong. So I feel like even in like football and baseball, a 315-pound bench isn't going to make you throw 5 miles an hour faster. It's learning how to control your body through rotation better, learning how to transfer your power through your hips better. I feel like that's good for MMA too. There's a certain point where you need to work on like corrective exercises, because let's say, I don't even know terminology, but like, isn't a mount, like if I'm on the ground, someone's like trying to hold me down.
Someone's basically, yeah, like
90-90 internal external rotation of the shoulder. That's extremely important, because if you're strong enough to start externally or internally rotating that shoulder to get them off of you, that's huge. And that's just like a
for sure
corrective exercise.
Yeah,
You know what I mean?
definitely. And well, like people put in Kimuras or whatever, like if you can get like a half second or a quarter second more time to not get submitted in a Kimura, that could be enough to slip something out or something like that. So you need to be able to like move, be strong in awkward positions for that. MMA is like kind of a hard one with training because there's so many ways to go about it. Because you could focus on being really explosive and trying to end the fight early, but you want to make sure that you still have the endurance to last if something happens and you're not able to end it right away. So people have different thought processes about that, but the biggest thing to focus on is like practice like you play. So if you're doing three-round fights, and I made this mistake for the first like 7 out of my 8 kickboxing fights, is I would like do cardio for like 40 minutes just hauling ass as hard as I could. And then I would go to fight and I would get to the last round and I'd just be standing there and I'm like, I feel like I haven't even tried. And I would go as hard as I can, but then I would recover or whatever.
Like I have the sports specific background, so I've never worked with MMA fighters before. That's something that I would like to get into one day. So I feel like a lot of MMA fighters would be way more explosive if they like implement like some basic plyometrics.
Yeah.
Maybe even like French contrast methodology. I've been running that with my brother and he's gotten so much more explosive. If you don't know what that is, it's like a heavy compound lift, like a back squat for like sets of 3 at like 80% of 1 RM. And then immediately after you're doing like a triple broad jump or a light plyometric. I feel like that'd be really good for MMA.
But in terms of like specific lifts too, and this is a funny one, but Zercher squats I think are phenomenal for MMA because especially for like wrestling, because you're constantly trying to either pick people up or just like drive a force upwards with your back from like a chest kind of level that you're trying to drop down. So I think Zercher squats where you're holding the barbell and the crooks of your elbow are really good. And like tire flips. They do tire flips at every MMA gym all the time. And like if you don't have a tire, a good way to supplement that is Zercher squats. So like practice like you play. If you're just going to work out, I probably wouldn't recommend Zerchers because they're terribly uncomfortable.
Sports specific background, we talk about how having full range of motion is the most beneficial thing you can do because in a game situation, you're never going to be in a half range of motion position. You're always going to be vulnerable. If you're extending, flexing the knee, the hip, all that kind of stuff, let's say you're running a route, you get hit across the middle, you need to be able to move resistance through full range of motion so you don't get injured. Ben, like I said, from his background, working with general population people, trying to rehab from injuries, prevent injuries, increase muscle mass, all that kind of stuff. We'll be talking about why full range of motion is optimal for just hypertrophy in general, which is just gaining muscle, increasing muscular fiber breakdown so that it'll come back stronger and bigger. Real quick, he will go into some of the reasons why he thinks full range of motion is beneficial for hypertrophy. I'll talk about why full range of motion is good for specific training in sports, but then also why partial range of motion is good for specific range of motion in sports. And then from there, I'll talk about real quick SFR, which is your stimulus to fatigue ratio, and how full range of motion has a higher SFR, which means you have to do less reps to accumulate that those adaptations that you're looking for in training. So Ben, take it away real quick.
All right, so I just want to clarify specifically with full range of motion, I am referencing for hypertrophy, not like sports specific stuff because you practice like you play in general. I mean, there's areas for it all, but specifically for just growing muscle, you want to practice full range of motion as following 3 things, which is you want to go like obviously as far as you can with a stretch in a muscle without losing a significant force production, and you would know what that is. Like it would be a large like probably close to at least 50% of the force you're able to produce. Pain-free, because you shouldn't be causing yourself pain or you're screwing something up, and without compromising form. And that all of those kind of almost cross over each other a little bit. But those are the 3 things that I tell people to stick to. You want to go in as much full range with following those 3 categories. With that, generally because the more a muscle is stretched and under stress creates more stimulus for muscle growth. It helps recruit as many muscle fibers as you can within that muscle group, and it's just a huge stimulus for growth in general. And yeah, I mean, in terms of like keeping people safe, especially with sports, you're gonna be in positions that like you're not trying to get in, especially with like MMA, jiu-jitsu, wrestling, things like that, and you're gonna be stretched out, and you want to be accustomed. You want your muscles to be used to being able to produce force under those stretched positions. But in terms of really just with hypertrophy, it's a huge stimulus for growth. I do believe there is some room for people with hypertrophy trying to grow muscle size, but that is like people like more getting to advanced categories who have hit significant plateaus, who like you may have like, you know, done all your sets or whatever like that, and you're nearing the end of like a big mesocycle, and you're just trying to get the like final little things to grow, and you can't like hit another full set with it, so you hit like a couple partials at the end of your set.
Yeah, I know.
But that would be for like advanced people who have been lifting a long time, who are bigger than me, trying to grow muscle. And other than that though, general population, you know, you want to practice full range of motion. There's no good, in terms of growing muscle, that is the best practice.
Yeah, you see like a lot of Olympia guys and all those professional IFBB pros that do like partials, but he just said, they've been lifting for like 20 years. And then have you know like Tom Platz, like have you seen his leg workouts where like at the end he's just doing like literally just like partials for like 20 reps on leg extensions? Like he's been lifting for like 40 years at that point. So like
at the same point, you know, athletes have to have a level of knowledge to get to where they get to. But just because someone is really far into a sport and like really good at something doesn't mean they're the most knowledgeable about that. I feel like that needs to be clarified. Many of them are, but some of them just spew out a bunch of bullshit, and you're like, well, how the fuck did they get that? And I don't know, but
we talk about that all the time. I mean, I listen to a lot of podcasts now, but like most people be like, oh, that guy's jacked, I'm gonna go listen to what he says. But he may just have had insane genetics, works pretty hard, doesn't really know what he's doing. Where like maybe like one of like a personal trainer or like sports performance coach that's like a little chubbier, doesn't really walk the walk, is just like so knowledgeable, he'll have you go light years ahead of what the other coach would. It's just, I don't know, don't judge a book by its cover in that aspect.
And on top of that, like people don't, this is another like kind of good rule to go by, because a lot of people talk about like foot positioning on the leg press, hand positioning for like bench, things like that, like for pull-ups and all of that. And going with the thought that the more stress when a muscle is stretched gives more stimulus for that muscle to grow. If you apply that to foot positioning and positioning for everything else, you can figure out what muscles you're targeting, because people are like, you know, I hear if you put your hands here, it targets this more, or whatever. So if you think, and it's kind of hard to visualize without a leg press, but I'll do my best, is on a leg press, if you move your feet down really low, you increase the angle that your knee range is going to go through, and you decrease the angle that your hip range is going to go through. So moving your feet low is going to target your quads more because that crosses over your knee. Versus if you move it high, your knee is going to move through less of a range, and your hips are going to move through more of a range. So you can apply that principle of like full range and things like that to foot positioning or hand positioning or anything to figure out what muscle groups you want to focus with. Like a lot of people know a wide grip bench focuses on chest more, close grip focuses on arms more, but people, like, I think if you just understand the concept, you can apply it to anywhere. Like, you don't just have to memorize this is why this does this. You know that wide grip bench, you don't have too much of an angle at your elbow, and your shoulder is going to go through a lot more range. Close grip bench, you are doing a huge range at your elbow, not as much range at your shoulder and chest. So you can apply that principle of stretching a muscle through a range to figure out like positionings and things like that.
This thing called SFR, I'll like put it on the screen, make it all pretty, but it's called stimulus to fatigue ratio. So obviously you want to have enough stimulus to create adaptations in your training, but you also don't want to compensate for them by being fatigued. Okay, so there's a thing called stimulus to fatigue ratio, which just shows how much stimuli you are recruiting when you're doing a movement, and then the fatigue that's associated with that. So we both really like Mike Erzental in Renaissance Periodization. He did a video talking about why full range of motion is bad in some instances, where he's a big guy proponent for like why it's good, and he was just saying for why it's good, it has a much higher SFR than a shorter range of motion. So what that means in a sense is, say we're doing a barbell squat, you're going ass to grass, set to 5. You'll have to do 5 reps to recruit more muscle fibers and have a larger adaptation than you would if you did partial range of motions for sets of 10. So going through that full entire range of motion through the joint and through the muscular tissue will have more adaptations than doing sets of 10. So
in terms of like a rehab standpoint, the first thing that everyone does in like the PT world is you move through the max pain-free range of motion, and then you try to get that pain-free range of motion to get to the point of the, like if it's my shoulder, you work it to hopefully get to the point of the not affected side. So I mean, yeah, it's a general rule. It's followed in both like just the muscle building world and like the rehab world of you want to just go through max range.
Yeah, so that kind of, I'm not going to talk about icing today, but that gets me so fucking pissed off. I saw a video that said, it was like, you know Squat University?
Yeah.
They went through it, they said the first thing you want to do after you'll say you roll your ankle is get your ankle moving through pain-free range of motion. And it's obviously going to be hard, but just moving it back and forth is going to recruit blood to
filter everything out,
reduce inflammation,
clean it out, and then get
muscles.
nutrients.
Yeah.
Sorry.
So that's why I literally, John, if you're watching this, I love you, man. He's like, icing is always the best thing you could do when you're injured. One, it cuts, we're talking about this next week, but it cuts off blood flow. And you want blood flow, even though it's going to swell, you want blood flow to get rid of inflammation when you hurt your ankle. Let's say the first thing you want to do is just move your ankle, maybe some inversion, eversion, just some like counterclockwise and clockwise movements. That's going to hurt, but it's going to be way more beneficial for getting you back to full capacity. I know Ian, my old boss at 440, he said he blew out his back or something like that. And literally the next day he was doing deadlifts like 40 pounds, just getting movement through the joint, and within like, he would just do hundreds of reps, and within like a week, he was back to normal. Same thing when I partially tore my pec. I wanted to just sit around and do nothing, but he had me doing like slingshot push-ups, just getting range of motion through the joint, through the muscle, and within a couple months, I was back to benching like 225 and all that kind of stuff. So
the last thing I want to hit with this range of motion is locking out. So the other end. So I talked about like, you know, as much joint angle as possible at the end range. So that's a pretty like interesting controversy, because like going like through my undergrad with exercise science, like everyone's like, you know, you never lock out, leave a soft bend and things like that. And over time, especially a couple years ago, I really started diving deep into major research, and that's when I got serious and decided like, all right, my goal is to try to transform the health and wellness world to a large capacity. I would find questions that I'm like, I like people told me this, but I don't know why. So when people ask me, why do I do this? I'm like, well, I don't know. My professors told me. So one of them was locking out. And the more research I did, and I never had anyone lock out, I never did it myself. More research I did, it seemed that it was relatively safe. There are pros and cons to it. So with locking out, like, you take some of the stress, like when you're doing a squat, you'll take some of the stress off of the quads and off your glutes when you're locked out, because you're just like more in a rested position nearly. You may like hit some of the like end range fibers a little bit, so I think it's good to kind of do that. However, like you do take the mechanical stress, which is a stimulus for growth, off of a lot of muscle when you lock out. Some pros for it is that, you know, you want to practice in a locked out position, even like sport specific things like that. Arm may get locked out in an arm bar, things like that. So I don't think there's anything wrong with locking out. A lot of people have a problem with it. I think the more you look into it, the more you realize it's just like something that you can do that isn't a problem. And then you can also perform mile reps, which if you don't know what that is, it's basically like if I was doing a set of 10 and then 2 mile reps or something like that. You do your set of 10 and then like of squats, and then once I get to 10, I probably can't do any more. But if I just like was able to rest the weight for just a second, grab one breath, I could probably get one more rep. And so that would be a mile rep. Like I can't do any more. I lock out, stand in, and then I go for one more rep, and then I pause, lock out, whatever, rest, and then do another mile rep. And it's just another way to get like a couple more reps in versus not being able to if you don't do that.
Partial range of motion can be beneficial. Sport specifically, and like for being power specific, I know a lot of people at 440 will do like pin squats, phenomenal. If you're talking about powerlifting too, like a board press, a pin press, all that kind of stuff is specific to sport. Powerlifting is a sport. Phenomenal in like a floor press, you're not going through the eccentric, you're just pressing through the concentric. Phenomenal for that. But we're talking about muscular hypertrophy or just general population people. Because like here we see a ton of people that just don't have range of motion at all, like on anything. So.
Yeah, and I think the most obvious example of like a partial range of motion working well is to jump higher, because quarter squats help significantly jump
for like
higher.
Volleyball players,
just in general, like basketball players or whatever. Because when you go to jump, you basically quarter squat or do like a third of the squat. You don't go super deep because you can't produce as much force as quickly.
Last thing, we had an idea. We're going to be starting a company soon. We're both starting new things in our life, so we're not launching it anytime soon. Probably like next year. We'll probably start working on it soon, just getting everything running. We both think we like bounce off each other good with ideas, so we're going to be starting a membership-based online app or online website to where we release workouts every week, every day, something like that. And we're going to branch off into other stuff eventually, but that's just kind of where we're thinking. And the company is going to be called Respawn Health and Wellness. The name comes from like in video games, like when you die, you respawn. We're thinking people maybe outdated with their lifestyles and habits and like gym experience, that we're respawning their habits to get back in the gym, respawning their confidence in themselves, and we're respawning their health in general. And we both think we have the credentials and like the work ethic to
beyond credentials, I think knowledge, like because credentials you can mean shit, because there's a lot of people who have a lot of credentials and don't know dick about nothing. But we both study the field more than most anyone I know, just because of a joy with it, and so I would feel confident.
But one day I do want to have my own like facility. Like I could see the logo like being on like a sign in front somewhere, like where we have like stress tests, like exercise physiology based, where we have like rehab stuff like PTA, sports specific personal training and performance. I think like the sky's the limit. I think we can build that while we have like our cushion with our jobs now. Just like build it to like make it a baby, and then one day maybe just take it and run. But I think it's a really good idea. We have a logo. I'll throw it up on the screen and everything like that.
And to go off your and that's like one of your major visions. And one of my major visions is like I want to take like some company and change the health and wellness world like via education. The most I love about it, like I love like giving cues and in person and talking to people, but I like educating people because I think the field is grossly overcomplicated in my opinion. So I feel being able to talk one-on-one and break down specific and getting people to know how to program and do things for themselves, so without overwhelming them. Because it doesn't need to be like a full-time job to you figure out how to like program your exercises and things like that. So I have a dream to like do a company where I can educate people mostly within
the philosophy on there is that every single day I want to teach my clients something new that they can do at home, and like in the long run they won't need me, because it's cool that they're giving me their money and stuff, but like I would rather them become more habitual with doing new nuances to better their life and better their understanding of why they're doing it. I always explain with everyone, here's why we're doing something, you should be feeling it here, this is what should be happening. If they say no, that's when our experience comes in to cue them up. Like, okay, maybe try bending your knees a little bit more, maybe try having more shoulder flexion or something like that. But yeah, I have a lot of confidence in what we could do with this company in the end. We both never had a company before, so it'll be a little learning curve, but yeah, I'm excited about it. So yeah.
And if you're interested in artificial sweeteners at all, just know that they're like pretty much safe. You're fine. So that covers that subject, but we can dive into reasons why. But yeah, research points to that they're overwhelmingly safe.
We were supposed to talk about it in this episode, but we kind of went on a tangent. We're done for the day. Thanks for Ben for coming on. I think we'll definitely have him on again, maybe with some other stuff too. I don't have an outro or anything. Thanks for tuning in to episode 2 of the Ellison Performance Podcast. I think this will take off running. There's a lot of information, just has to meet the right audience. But yeah, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week while we talk about icing and percussion therapy, all that kind of myofascial release stuff and its effect on performance. So, see you next time. Thanks again for coming on, Ben. Yeah.
Nice.